17 years ago, a bright-eyed teenager stepped aboard a Caribbean cruise ship, expecting the adventure of a lifetime. But before the week was over, she vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions, grief, and a family desperate for answers. For more than a decade, investigators searched the seas, friends clung to hope, and rumors swirled about what really happened that night on the ship. Then, in the most unexpected way, a single photograph on Instagram would change everything, revealing a truth more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the mysteries we uncover. The summer of 2006 was supposed to mark the brightest chapter of 17-year-old Madison Clark's young life. Fresh out of Westfield High School in suburban Connecticut, she was standing on the threshold of her future, with an acceptance letter from Northwestern University taped proudly to the family's refrigerator. As if that weren't enough, her parents had surprised her with something she had long dreamed of, a week-long Caribbean cruise with her best friend Emma Rodriguez. It was a gift meant to celebrate her hard work, her accomplishments, and the endless possibilities of adulthood that lay just ahead. Madison and Emma were the kind of inseparable pair people often envied. They finished each other's sentences, swapped clothes without asking, and could hold entire conversations through nothing more than a glance across a crowded room. Madison, thoughtful and reserved, often leaned on Emma's fearless, adventurous spirit, and together they struck a perfect balance, one quiet, one bold, yet both equally devoted to their bond. Their friendship was built on a foundation of trust and secrets, a closeness they once swore would follow them to the grave. In the weeks leading up to the trip, the two girls buzzed with anticipation. Madison's mother, Patricia, remembered her daughter scattering cruise brochures across her bedroom floor, circling activities and excursions with the excitement of someone already halfway aboard the ship. She hadn't been that happy since she got into Northwestern, Patricia would later recall. To the outside world, the Clarks were a picture-perfect American family. Robert, Madison's father, was a respected insurance executive who volunteered as a Little League coach, while Patricia worked as a school nurse and offered her spare time at the local animal shelter. Madison's 14-year-old brother, Tyler, adored her despite the occasional sibling bickering, and their golden retriever, Buddy, completed the idyllic image of suburban life. Friends and teachers describe Madison as intelligent, compassionate, and steady. She had volunteered at the local hospital throughout high school, determined to one day become a pediatric nurse. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Henderson, often said, she was the kind of student who quietly helped others without being asked, tutoring struggling classmates and offering encouragement to anyone in need. Madison avoided trouble, stayed away from drugs and alcohol, and had only ventured on a handful of carefully supervised dates. She was, by all accounts, a model teenager. Emma, on the other hand, was Madison's perfect counterpart. Where Madison found comfort in books and quiet evenings, Emma thrived on parties, laughter, and the energy of a crowd. Their differences only strengthened their connection. Emma's family had immigrated from Puerto Rico when she was a child, and though her sister still lived in San Juan, Emma often said Madison felt more like true family. The cruise itself had been inspired by Emma's aunt, Maria Rodriguez, who worked at a travel agency in Hartford and secured them a great deal on a mid-sized ship, the Caribbean Dream. The itinerary promised a sun-drenched adventure through St. Thomas, St. Martin, and Barbados, setting sail from Fort Lauderdale on July 15th and returning 1 week later. It was the first trip the girls would take without their families, a milestone that symbolized freedom, independence, and the leap into adulthood. At first, both sets of parents hesitated, uneasy about letting their daughters go unsupervised. But after endless promises of responsibility and regular check-ins, their concerns softened. The ship had a solid safety record, and with hundreds of passengers and crew on board, the parents convinced themselves that nothing could go wrong. As the departure date drew closer, Madison poured herself into preparation with her usual focus and precision. She studied each destination, drafted lists of sites she wanted to explore, and even practiced Spanish phrases she might need in the islands. She also purchased a Canon PowerShot camera, her pride and joy, determined to document every laugh, every meal, every breathtaking view. Emma, meanwhile, was already imagining the new people they'd meet, the parties on deck, and the adventures that came with freedom at sea. Emma had heard that cruises were the perfect place to meet new people, and she was determined to push Madison out of her comfort zone. She coaxed her friend into packing outfits that felt bolder than her usual choices, even convincing her to buy a bikini, something Madison had never pictured herself wearing. Madison blushed, protesting that she preferred the safety of a one-piece, but Emma's infectious enthusiasm won out, as it often did. The night before departure, Madison's family gathered at Tony's, their favorite Italian spot where she had once worked as a hostess. The owner, Tony Marcelli, would later recall the evening with a wistful smile. She was glowing, he remembered. Madison spoke endlessly about the cruise, gushing over the adventures she and Emma planned, convinced it would be the time of their lives. That glow lingered when they returned home, where she stayed up past midnight, carefully folding and refolding her belongings. Her mother, Patricia, found her sitting on the bed, surrounded by neat piles of clothes and toiletries. "I'm just so excited, Mom," Madison said, hugging her tightly. "This is going to be the best week ever." Patricia had no way of knowing those words would replay in her mind like a fragile recording for the rest of her life. July 15th dawned warm and bright. Robert Clark packed the girls' luggage into his SUV, while Patricia double-checked passports, IDs, and emergency contacts. The drive to Bradley International Airport in Windsor Locks felt both ordinary and monumental. At the terminal, Madison hugged her parents goodbye, promising to call as soon as she settled into her cabin. "Don't worry about us," she reassured with a confident grin. "We'll be fine." "It's going to be amazing." Emma's parents joined them for the farewell, her mother Maria pressing snacks into their hands and kissing both girls on the forehead. "Look out for each other," she urged, "and have the time of your lives." None of the adults could have imagined that this joyful send-off would mark the start of a nightmare that would consume both families for years to come. The flight to Fort Lauderdale passed quickly in a haze of chatter about excursions, photo plans, and sun-soaked adventures. But beneath the excitement, destiny stirred. They were heading toward a week that would fracture their lives forever. One girl destined to vanish without a trace, the other left with nothing but guilt and unanswered questions. By Saturday afternoon, the Caribbean dream lived up to its name. Towering above the port in Fort Lauderdale, the ship gleamed like a floating palace. Capable of carrying nearly 2,000 passengers and 800 crew, it was a small city at sea, complete with restaurants, pools, theaters, a casino, and endless corridors of polished wood and glass. The girls' cabin, tucked away on Deck 7, was modest but cozy. 2 twin beds, a compact bathroom, and just enough storage to hold their carefully packed lives. Madison claimed the bed by the porthole that wasn't really a window, while Emma sprawled across the other, already snapping photos with her camera. For their first hour aboard, they wandered wide-eyed, taking in the rock-climbing wall, the sprawling pools, and the grand dining rooms with their gleaming chandeliers. That evening's safety drill was a mandatory routine, and Madison listened intently to every detail about life jackets and muster stations. Emma, meanwhile, had her attention fixed on a group of college boys from Florida who laughed through the instructions, their energy hinting at trouble Madison wasn't eager to invite. The first 2 days slipped by in a golden blur. The ship cut smoothly across turquoise waters toward St. Thomas, and the girls fell into a rhythm that felt both new and comforting. Mornings began with buffet, breakfasts, followed by lazy hours by the pool or explorations of the ship's many decks. Each evening, they dressed for elaborate dinners at their assigned table for 8, where their companions became part of the unfolding story. The Hendersons, a retired couple from Ohio celebrating 40 years together, Jake Morrison and Chris Taylor, Florida State students with easy laughs, and Susan Chen, a 35-year-old marketing executive from San Francisco traveling alone after a difficult divorce. Different as they all were, they shared food, conversation, and laughter under the ship's glittering lights, unaware of the shadow that lingered just ahead. From the very start, the group of new friends bonded easily over shared meals and stories. Emma, ever the social butterfly, naturally fell into the role of planner, while Madison quietly became the listener who remembered every detail and asked the questions that made people feel truly seen. Among the group, Jake Morrison, a 21-year-old business major with an easy grin, seemed especially taken with Madison. Though she was shy, she found herself drawn to his attention, surprised by how much she enjoyed it. Emma noticed, of course, and with her trademark mischief kept teasing, "You've got to live a little. College is right around the corner, and you've barely dated anyone." On their third morning, the ship docked at St. Thomas, where the girls had booked a day trip to Coral World Ocean Park. The turquoise waters and colorful reefs were unlike anything Madison had ever experienced. She snorkeled beside Emma, snapping photos with her new camera, thrilled when she captured the perfect shot of her best friend gliding past a sea turtle as big as a child's bicycle. That evening, back on the ship, the group gathered again for dinner, and Madison seemed transformed. She laughed at Jake's stories about fraternity pranks, her cheeks flushed with joy, and for once she agreed to join everyone later at the nightclub. Susan Chen, watching from across the table, later recalled thinking how radiant Madison looked that night, like a young woman finally stepping into her own. The nightclub, Waves, pulsed with energy on Deck 11. Lights flashed across the dance floor as a DJ mixed chart-topping hits with crowd favorites. The group claimed a table near the action, and for the first time since the trip began, Madison allowed herself to dance. Jake spun her around and she laughed freely, while Emma clapped and cheered from the sidelines. For a moment, everything felt perfect. 2 friends, a ship full of possibilities, and the warm Caribbean air drifting in through the upper decks. But just before midnight, the mood shifted. Madison excused herself to use the restroom, slipping into the hallway beyond the club. Emma, busy chatting with Chris Taylor, barely noticed her go. Other passengers later remembered seeing her walk down that short corridor toward the bathrooms. Yet she never came back. At first, no one thought much of it. Maybe she'd stepped outside for air, or struck up a conversation with someone new. But when the clock neared 12:30 and Madison still hadn't returned, unease began to creep in. Emma searched the restrooms, circled the club, and went up to the deck above. There was no sign of her friend. By 1 in the morning, Emma's unease had hardened into fear. Jake and Chris joined the search, combing the casino, the 24-hour pizza stand, and the starlit decks where passengers often lingered. They called her name again and again. No one had seen her. Emma, shaking, finally went to the guest services desk on Deck 5, where she found Assistant Cruise Director Maria Santos. With nearly a decade of experience at sea, Santos tried to soothe her panic. "Passengers sometimes lose track of time," she explained. "She probably met some people and is hanging out." She suggested Emma check their cabin, and promised they'd file a report if Madison didn't turn up by morning. But Emma's instincts screamed otherwise. She pressed harder, insisting something was terribly wrong. Reluctantly, Santos agreed to order security to check the public areas. Hours passed. No trace. By 3 in the morning, the matter was escalated to the ship's security chief, Captain Rodriguez. Crew members searched lounges, storage areas, crew quarters, even the medical center. Still nothing. Emma drifted between frantic searching and waiting in their cabin, praying for the sound of the door opening, for Madison to walk in with an explanation that made sense. Again and again she tried calling Madison's cell phone. But in the middle of the Caribbean there was no signal, only silence. The night stretched endlessly, a nightmare tightening its grip, and Emma's certainty grew. Her best friend was gone. At dawn on Tuesday, July 18, 2006, more than 6 hours after Madison Clark slipped from sight, a hush fell over the Caribbean dream as Captain Rodriguez announced that a passenger was missing, turning holiday chatter into a ship-wide current of fear and speculation. Interviews confirmed she'd left the table near 11:30, and security footage showed her exiting the nightclub hallway toward the restrooms. A blind spot for cameras on many vessels, and then nothing. No reappearance on any corridor feed, as if she had stepped into air itself. By afternoon, with a stem-to-stern sweep complete and hope fraying, Rodriguez ordered the ship to reverse course and slow search its nighttime track, while Emma phoned Madison's parents from the communications center, her words shattering into sobs as Patricia's cry carried down the line, and Robert started booking flights to meet the ship at St. Martin's Cruise Port in Phillipsburg, the island's primary dock for large vessels. The U.S. Coast Guard mobilized, 2 cutters on the water, a long-range HC-130 Super Hercules overhead to direct the grid, and a short-range MH-65 Dolphin helicopter to run low, tight patterns, using currents, wind, and the exact route to model the search box over hundreds of square miles, a painstaking method they routinely apply in Caribbean rescues. Aboard the ship, an FBI agent with maritime experience established a makeshift command post and began minute-by-minute reconstructions with witnesses, Emma recounting Madison's blue sundress, white sandals, and light drinks, her own regret pounding like a second heartbeat as she repeated the small details that now felt enormous. Ashore, authorities prepared for the ship's arrival. While at sea, the search pulsed between spikes of hope and sinking silence, and the narrative that had begun as a carefree island cruise tightened into a mystery whose last known anchor points were painfully ordinary. Coral World Ocean Park on St. Thomas the day before, where the girls had snorkeled beside sea turtles at Cokie Point's Marine Park, and a nightclub hallway on Deck 11 where a young woman simply stopped being seen. Facts that investigators would later verify against port records, ship CCTV coverage, and coastal aviation logs, even as the ocean gave back no answers. Jake Morrison sat across from investigators for more than 3 hours, his nerves laid bare as he insisted he knew nothing of what had happened. She was happy that night, he told Agent Foster, recalling their talk about keeping in touch once she began at Northwestern and he returned to Florida State. But the security footage painted a far more troubling picture. Madison entered the restroom hallway at 11:32. Yet, she never came back. There were only 2 exits, back toward the nightclub or through a crew service door leading to a restricted deck. That door, normally locked, had been left ajar by a crew member hauling supplies. Questioned for hours, the crewman, 28-year-old Carlos Mendez, swore he closed it again by 11:45. Foster's words to Captain Rodriguez carried an ominous weight. Either she went through that service door, or she's still aboard. And we've scoured this vessel from bow to stern. Security had already swept cabins, storage rooms, crew quarters, even hidden recesses where someone might be held. Nothing. By Wednesday morning, Robert and Patricia Clark arrived in St. Martin, their grief written across every gesture. Patricia clutched a photo of her daughter, pleading with strangers at the port, while Robert channeled his anguish into cooperation with the Coast Guard and FBI. "She doesn't have enemies," he told Foster. "She's just a good kid who was excited about her future." Yet with every other possibility exhausted, suspicion began to settle on the theory of an accidental fall. The deck beyond the service door had railings that didn't meet modern safety standards, low enough that a stumble or lean could prove deadly. But why would Madison have gone there? Why would she ignore the crew-only sign? And if she had fallen, why had no one heard a splash or a cry for help in the still Caribbean night? Emma's mind became a prison of what-ifs. Again and again, she replayed the moment her friend left the table. "I was supposed to notice," she confessed to Foster through tears. "I was supposed to protect her." Passengers, too, split between compassion and irritation. Some, like the Hendersons from Ohio, retraced steps and quizzed others for fragments of memory. Susan Chen, the executive from San Francisco, offered a chilling detail. She seemed different that night, more daring. She was flirting with Jake. Emma told me that wasn't like her at all. It was as if she was trying on a new self. Meanwhile, the Coast Guard pressed on with a search that widened by the hour. Using drift models and current analyses, they expanded their grid to cover hundreds of square miles, an unforgiving sweep of ocean where one life, one body, could vanish as easily as a drop of rain. Every day that passed without discovery deepened the dread that Madison Clark had been swallowed by the sea, leaving only a trail of haunting questions and the ache of absence behind. For 4 relentless days, aircraft traced grid after grid above the shimmering Caribbean, while Coast Guard cutters swept the sea with sonar and underwater cameras, probing every crevice where Madison might have been lost. Yet on Friday, July 21st, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell made the call no family ever wants to hear. "We've covered every reasonable area where Ms. Clark could be located," she told reporters in San Juan. "Without additional evidence, we cannot justify continuing to deploy resources." Patricia collapsed into Robert's arms, her grief piercing the silence, while Robert, drawn and sleepless, stood before the cameras and vowed, "We're not giving up on our daughter. Madison is out there somewhere and we're going to find her." The following day, the Caribbean Dream returned to Fort Lauderdale, retracing its week-long voyage. Emma stepped off the ship, clutching not only her own luggage but Madison's untouched suitcase. Clothes carefully folded, souvenirs waiting for hands that would never receive them. The drive back to Connecticut with the Clark family was suffocating, broken only by Patricia's cries and Robert's steady attempts to hold her together. 14-year-old Tyler sat in silence, his youthful gaze hollowed into something far older, fixed on a world that suddenly felt unsafe. From Miami, Agent Foster pressed forward, though the trail grew colder by the hour. The crew had been cleared, their records clean, their alibis checked. Passenger lists and background reviews turned up nothing suspicious. All that remained were the haunting frames of video showing Madison walking into a hallway and vanishing. In Connecticut, the media carried her school photo nightly, headlines screaming of a mystery that gripped the state. Calls poured into an FBI hotline, but each promising lead collapsed into another dead end, sightings that evaporated under scrutiny. 3 weeks later, Foster's voice on the phone brought little comfort. "We've exhausted all immediate leads. The case remains open, but we need something new to move forward." Madison Clark, once so full of promise, became a statistic, another name on the list of those who vanished without a trace in the Caribbean. For Emma, the weight of guilt was crushing. Therapy began within weeks, yet no counselor's words could dull the sharp edge of knowing she had let her friend walk away alone. For the Clarks, life fractured into before and after. Patricia left her job at the school, consumed by her mission, filling their living room with maps, case files, and family photos. Robert returned to his office, though the man who once cracked jokes and talked baseball now spoke in measured tones, Madison's photo always within reach. Determined to keep hope alive, he hired Marcus Webb, a retired FBI agent who specialized in missing persons. For 8 months, Webb worked the case, re-interviewing passengers by phone, chasing down every tip, and consulting oceanographers about currents and survival odds. His final report, delivered in March 2007, was detailed yet devastating, thorough, methodical, but inconclusive. Madison's fate remained an open wound, her absence echoing louder than any answer ever could. Marcus Webb's final words in his report echoed like a sentence without closure. I found no evidence that Madison is alive, but I've also found no definitive proof that she's deceased. It left the Clarks suspended in a limbo few families ever escape. Tyler, once a bright and outgoing teenager, sank deepest into the shadows. His grades slipped, he quit baseball, and the boy who used to chatter endlessly now spoke with a bitterness that unsettled his parents. Everyone keeps saying she's probably dead, he told their therapist, Dr. Linda Morrison. But what if she isn't? What if she's out there and we're just giving up? That question became a knife in the heart of every family session. Emma carried a burden of her own, heavier still. By the fall, she was at the University of Connecticut, but college life felt hollow. She changed her major from communications to criminal justice, telling her advisor she wanted to help other families like the Clarks. Each Sunday, she drove to Riverside Cemetery, where a granite marker bore Madison's name, though no body lay beneath it. Sitting cross-legged in the grass, she whispered apologies, retelling the details of her week, confessing her guilt. I should have noticed. I should have followed you. I should have done something different. Patricia embraced Emma like a second daughter, inviting her for dinners and phone calls, while Robert, though kind, kept a quiet distance, her presence a constant reminder of loss. Tyler's resentment simmered openly, anger that Emma, the last to see Madison, had failed to bring her back. The first anniversary in July 2007 pulled the case back into the spotlight. Patricia appeared on morning news shows, clutching Madison's photo and pleading for answers. The FBI released an age-progressed image of what Madison might look like at 18, while the Coast Guard reminded the public that the case was technically still open. Yet by the following year, the calls from law enforcement slowed, the Clarks' private investigator had to be let go, and the bulletin board in their living room froze in time, a static shrine to hope unfulfilled. Emma graduated in 2010, armed with her degree and a fierce sense of purpose. She became a victim's advocate for the Connecticut State Police, known for her tireless dedication to missing persons. Colleagues never knew the personal ghost that fueled her expertise. How she taught herself to mine social media, track digital breadcrumbs, and even use facial recognition software to scan photos of unidentified women across the Caribbean. Robert, worn down by grief and a minor heart attack, retired in 2011 and found new purpose as a volunteer with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, guiding other parents through the same labyrinth he and Patricia had endured. And Patricia, after years of drowning in sorrow, began to channel her grief into action of her own, transforming pain into something close to resolve. Patricia refused to let her daughter's disappearance fade into silence. In the basement of their church, she built a lifeline for other grieving families, a support group where pain was shared and survival became a collective act. She turned her anguish into advocacy, pressing lawmakers for reforms that might prevent another young life from vanishing at sea. Her determination helped push through the Cruise Vessel Safety and Security Act of 2010, which mandated more cameras, brighter lighting in isolated areas, and round-the-clock medical staff on cruise ships. A small plaque at the National Transportation Safety Board in Washington, D.C., now bears Madison's name, an acknowledgement carved in stone that her absence would at least bring change. By 2012, 6 years had passed, and the Clark family's grief had settled into ritual. Birthdays became quiet gatherings. Anniversaries were marked with candles and tears. Emma, now a senior victims advocate in Hartford, poured herself into cold cases, but her private search for Madison never ceased. Her evenings often ended hunched over a laptop, combing through Facebook pages, Instagram feeds, and travel forums. Technology had become her hunting ground, each update in software sharpening her obsession. More than once, she froze at the sight of a stranger's profile photo, someone with Madison's build, her hair, her smile, only to feel her heart shatter again when the resemblance dissolved under closer scrutiny. Detective Sarah Walsh, who inherited the case in 2009, called the Clarks twice a year with updates that carried no real news. "The case remains active," she would repeat, though nothing ever changed. Madison had become one of the countless names on America's long list of the missing, her family trapped in that cruel borderland between hope and surrender. By 2014, Tyler was in community college, studying social work, determined to help others even as he rarely spoke his sister's name aloud. The family's bulletin board of clues and timelines had become a quiet memorial, the paper edges curling, the ink fading. And then, nearly 12 years later, the silence cracked. On a cold Wednesday night in March 2018, Emma sat alone in her Hartford apartment, a glass of wine by her side, her laptop open in front of her. What began as ritual, a weekly search through the endless tide of social media, shifted into something else. Years of work as a victim's advocate had honed her skills, giving her access to tools most civilians never see: facial recognition software, digital archives, backdoor searches. Emma had mastered them all. That night, as she sifted through names and images, one profile made her breath catch in her throat. Emma's message landed like a pebble thrown into a still pond, and when Madison, calling herself Sophia, answered back that Friday morning, the ripple turned into a tidal wave. At first, the reply was a shaky, almost disbelieving, "Emma, is this really you? Oh my God, I can't believe you found me." And then came the quiet, breathy confession that stopped Emma cold. Madison said she had been alive, that she'd been somewhere else for years, and that she was terrified to be found. For a moment, hope and dread collided so fast, Emma's mouth went dry. Relief that her friend wasn't dead collided with a dozen new questions. Why a different name? What had happened the night on the ship, and who might still be a threat? And Madison's messages, terse and careful, suggested reasons without offering full answers, hinting at fear, secrecy, and a need for caution that explained her new identity while refusing to let Emma bring her straight home. They traded short, urgent messages that day, Madison explaining she couldn't talk on a call yet, that she was safe for now, that she'd chosen a new life under a new name for reasons she couldn't type, and Emma, trembling, offered every possible lifeline: a promise to keep her secret if she wanted, an assurance that the family never stopped looking, and a plea, finally, for a meeting in a public, neutral place with clear safety measures in place. The tone rose and fell like a tide. Ecstatic disbelief, the crushing weight of years lost, a glimmer of hope, and then the cold caution that this reunion might be more dangerous than joyful. But before any plans could be made, Madison asked for time, for a careful plan, and for Emma to do one thing immediately. Send a recent photograph of herself and one line about where she was right now so Madison could verify the voice on the other end was truly Emma's, and not someone pretending to be her. Emma obeyed without hesitation, and as she hit send, the air in her apartment seemed charged with electricity. Months, years, and a dozen impossible possibilities suddenly condensed into a single, fragile thread that might, if they handled it right, snap the family out of limbo or vanish forever again. Madison's voice on the other end of the line was older, threaded with a faint accent and a lifetime of fear. And for Emma, the moment bent time. Years of frozen grief crashed into frantic relief as the two women sobbed until words came. Madison said she was alive, that she had been taken from the cruise that night, that she'd been moved through a shadow network, first to Venezuela, then to Colombia, sold and traded like cargo, held for 8 brutal years before she finally escaped and, with help, rebuilt a quiet life in Costa Rica under the name Sofia Martinez. Her confession landed like an avalanche of horror and explanation. She'd been watched and targeted on the ship by a crew member named Miguel Santos, who, she said, worked with traffickers and forced her through the service door into a nightmare of captivity. A calculated crime that erased her past and severed all contact. And although she longed to come home, she begged caution, terrified that those who controlled her fate might still be hunting her. So she asked Emma for a careful plan, one that would verify identities, protect her location, and bring law enforcement in at the right moment. Emma promised everything, feeling the fierce mix of guilt, hope, and resolve surge through her. That night they began mapping a way to bring Madison back safely, aware that rescue would mean untangling a transnational web of criminals and healing 12 years of lost life. But certain now that the long silence had finally been pierced, and that the hardest work, reuniting Madison with her family and forcing her captors to answer, was only just beginning. Emma sat frozen in her living room after the 4-hour call, the glow of her phone screen still burning against the dark. Madison was alive after 12 years of funerals without bodies, bulletin boards without answers, and nights Emma had spent begging the universe for a sign. But this wasn't the end of the nightmare. It was the beginning of a delicate rescue. Madison had lived under a false identity in Costa Rica, haunted by the same network that had stolen her youth. If she was to come home, it had to be done carefully, with law enforcement, diplomacy, and airtight protection. On Saturday morning, Emma's voice trembled as she dialed Patricia Clark. "Mrs. Clark, please sit down," she said, bracing herself. "I found her. I found Madison." For a moment there was only silence, then a sound that shattered the air, half sob, half gasp, as Patricia whispered, "That's not possible. It's been 12 years. But Emma pressed on, explaining through tears that Madison was alive in Costa Rica, that she had spoken to her, that she wanted to come home. Within hours, Robert collapsed into tears of relief, and Tyler, now 26 and working as a social worker in New Haven, raced home to join his parents. That weekend, the Clarks' house became a command center of hope. Conference calls with Madison and Emma stretching late into the night, voices breaking, hearts barely daring to believe. Detective Sarah Walsh escalated the case immediately, looping in the FBI and the State Department. Within 48 hours, Agent Daniel Foster, the very man who had once stood on the Caribbean Dream searching for a missing teenager, was back, now operating through the Bureau's International Division. "This is unprecedented," he told Emma. "In 20 years, I've never seen someone resurface after this long, especially like this." The logistics were staggering. Madison had no legal documents, her U.S. passport void after she was declared legally dead in 2010. The State Department worked with Costa Rican officials to confirm her identity, while drafting emergency travel papers that could bring her back across borders. In Puerto Viejo, a small town tucked against Costa Rica's lush Caribbean coast, Madison remained in hiding at the home of Maria Gonzalez, the woman who had sheltered her after her escape. Maria had become a surrogate mother, helping Madison relearn what it meant to live without chains. Yet as the FBI dug deeper, they uncovered the scale of the network that had stolen her. Santos had been just one cog in a decade-long trafficking ring, preying on young American women aboard cruise ships. Though he had been killed in a Colombian shootout in 2014, his associates still operated, and Madison's return had to be managed as both a rescue and an intelligence operation. Dr. Rachel Stevens, a trauma specialist, joined the effort to prepare the Clarks for the long road ahead. "What Madison has survived is unimaginable," she explained during a video call. "She'll need extensive therapy, and reintegration will challenge every member of your family. This is not simply a reunion. It's the beginning of a recovery that may take years." Madison herself felt that weight, torn between the joy of returning and the fear that the ghosts of her captivity still stalked the edges of her freedom. Each nightly call with Emma revealed the tug-of-war in Madison's heart. The longing to come home warred with the fear of leaving behind the fragile safety she'd carved out as Sophia Martinez. "I don't even know if I remember how to be Madison Clark," she confessed, her voice breaking. "I've been Sophia for 4 years. I speak Spanish more than English. I live in a house where no one knows the truth. It's simple, and it's safe." Emma's reply was steady but tender. "But it isn't your real life. Your parents need to see you. Tyler needs to see you. None of this was your fault." The breakthrough came when Madison finally agreed to a video call with her family. The FBI secured the connection, and Emma set up her laptop in her Hartford apartment. When the screen flickered to life, Patricia Clark dissolved into sobs that didn't stop for nearly 10 minutes while Robert sat frozen, staring at the face he never thought he'd see again. Tyler whispered his sister's name over and over as if saying it would anchor her back into existence. Through tears of her own, Madison managed, "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Dad. I'm so sorry I couldn't come home sooner." For 3 hours they talked, about her escape, about Maria Gonzalez who had saved her, and about the small hidden life she had built in Costa Rica. "I want to come home," she admitted at last. "But what if they're still out there? What if coming back puts you in danger?" Agent Foster stepped in, assuring her that weeks of coordinated operations had already led to arrests, and that security would surround her every step of the way. And so, on April 15th, 2018, 12 years and 9 months after she vanished, Madison Clark stepped off a plane at Bradley International Airport. Escorted by FBI agents and State Department officials, she walked into a secured terminal where her parents, her brother, and Emma waited. Patricia clung to her daughter for 20 straight minutes, whispering, "My baby," again and again, while Robert kept touching her cheeks as though to prove she was real. Tyler, now taller and broader, lifted his sister clear off the floor in a bear hug that left them both sobbing. Only then did Emma step forward, waiting until the family had embraced before folding her best friend into her arms. You never stopped looking for me, Madison whispered. You never gave up. Emma's answer was simple, trembling. I couldn't. You're my best friend. The story exploded across headlines worldwide. The teen who vanished on a cruise, found 12 years later on Instagram. Yet the Clarks, guided by the FBI, released only careful details to protect Madison's privacy. Back in Connecticut, Madison returned to the bedroom her parents had preserved like a shrine. The Northwestern acceptance letter still hung on her bulletin board, its edges yellowed with age, a haunting symbol of a life stolen at 17. The adjustment was brutal. Madison woke from nightmares drenched in sweat, panicked in grocery aisles, and froze at sudden sounds. She struggled to sleep in a real bed after years on thin mattresses. But with therapy, her family's steadfast love, and Emma's unwavering presence, she began to mend. She enrolled in online college courses, taking back the education she'd been denied. She began volunteering with trafficking survivor networks, turning her scars into guidance for others. And when she testified against the remnants of the trafficking ring, her courage helped bring down those who once believed they could erase her forever. Madison Clark's journey closed, not with a headline-grabbing finale, but with something far rarer: quiet resilience. 6 years after her return, she has shaped a life defined not by what was taken from her, but by what she has chosen to give back. From her home in Connecticut, she works quietly with the Connecticut Coalition Against Human Trafficking, helping build programs and training others to recognize the signs she once lived through. Her story has been cited in congressional hearings, in training manuals, and even in law school lectures about victim advocacy and international cooperation. Yet Madison herself remains out of the spotlight. She avoids social media, keeps her world carefully contained, and knows that safety is a discipline as much as it is a condition. In rare moments of reflection, she admits she cannot recover the years stolen in her teens and 20s, but she has found meaning in using those lost years to protect others. Her scars have faded, though the memories they represent linger like shadows. With Dr. Rachel Stevens' guidance, Madison has learned to balance self-care with advocacy, building a future from fragments. Completing her social work degree online, graduating summa cum laude, she defied the life script that was torn from her at 17 and wrote a new one on her own terms. The Clark family, too, has been transformed. Patricia carries both pride and guilt, learning to let go of the shrine her home had become and to embrace the presence of her daughter rather than the memory of her absence. Robert still bristles at the failures of the systems that allowed Madison to disappear, but he has redirected that anger into steadfast support. Tyler, now a clinical social worker himself, calls his sister his greatest teacher in resilience. Together, they have rebuilt something resembling normalcy: smaller gatherings, quieter celebrations, but a love that is sharper for having been tested. What began as a teenager's dream vacation in the summer of 2006 became a nightmare spanning continents, a mystery that nearly swallowed a family whole. And yet, through persistence, friendship, and unrelenting love, it turned into a story of survival, reform, and hope. Madison's life today is not free of pain, but it is her own. Proof that even in the aftermath of unimaginable darkness, there can be light, purpose, and the possibility of healing. Emma Rodriguez's life became the second half of Madison's story. Proof that friendship can be both a wound and a weapon. The guilt that consumed her 20s transformed into purpose once Madison was found, and today she stands at the forefront of Connecticut's Digital Forensics and Missing Persons Unit. Her techniques, born from desperation in front of a laptop at 2 in the morning, are now standard tools in solving cold cases across the country. 14 families have seen reunions or closure because Emma refused to believe any case was hopeless. Sometimes the answer is hiding in plain sight, she says. But you need the patience and the faith to keep looking. For Emma and Madison, their bond has been rebuilt, not as the carefree friendship of 17-year-olds, but as a mature alliance tempered by suffering. They see each other regularly, they talk often, and though their relationship carries the scars of 12 lost years, the loyalty remains unshakable. Madison's testimony helped federal prosecutors dismantle a trafficking network that had stolen dozens of young women, leading to 12 convictions and new legal precedents for maritime trafficking investigations. Even in death, Miguel Santos loomed over the case, his violent end in Colombia a grim reminder of the dangers these networks breed. The impact stretched beyond one family or one state. At least 40 women were identified as victims of the same criminal operation, their lives altered forever. But some rescued directly because Madison's case was pursued. Cruise lines, once lax in passenger protection, were forced to confront their vulnerabilities. Background checks for crew, enhanced passenger tracking, and international law enforcement partnerships became mandatory. Captain Rodriguez himself, long retired, admitted before Congress that he thought of Madison every day. "We failed to protect her," he told lawmakers, his voice weighted with regret. "That's something I will carry for the rest of my life." Madison's story is now taught in police academies, law schools, and advocacy groups worldwide. It's a case that reshaped how disappearances at sea are understood and investigated. No longer are families dismissed with the assumption of an accident. Trafficking is considered early, and lives are saved because of it. What began as a summer cruise for a 17-year-old in 2006 became an odyssey of loss, survival, and reform. Madison Clark's life is no longer defined by what was stolen, but by what was built in its aftermath, a legacy of awareness, of systemic change, and of two women who proved that even after 12 silent years, hope can still answer back. Madison Clark's story closes not with the shadow of disappearance, but with the enduring glow of survival and purpose. What began as a carefree graduation cruise in 2006 became a 12-year nightmare, yet it ended with a return home, a family reunited, and a legacy that has reshaped how the world responds to missing persons and trafficking. Her survival offered hope to families everywhere who still wait by the phone, who still hang photos on their walls, who still believe in miracles. And Emma's 12-year search is proof that loyalty and love can outlast silence, fear, and even time itself. Today, Madison chooses not to dwell on what could have been, but on what is. She has built a life of advocacy, of healing, of quiet strength, transforming her pain into a lifeline for others. Her family found a way forward, Emma found her calling, and the systems that once failed them have been forced to evolve. The girl who vanished on a cruise and reappeared through an Instagram profile is no longer just a mystery. She is a voice, a survivor, and a symbol of resilience. If this extraordinary journey moved you, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe other impossible missing persons cases could still hold hope like Madison's? And what lessons should we take from Emma's refusal to stop searching? Share your perspective below. And if you want to hear more stories of survival, mystery, and the unbreakable human spirit, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Your support keeps these voices alive and ensures that stories like Madison's are never forgotten. Madison Clark's story is no longer just a mystery. It is a testament to survival, friendship, and the power of never giving up hope. Her return proved that even after 12 years of silence, miracles can still happen. But her case also reminds us of the countless